So back in September when the iPhone 15 was revealed, it was said that its Pro version will include an A17 Pro processor, allowing this phone to effectively play games like Resident Evil 4 Remake, Resident Evil Village, as well as Assassin's Creed Mirage. Now, we actually got proper gameplay of all of these games within Apple's showcase, and a lot of people were pretty stunned, myself included. Obviously, when we think about mobile phone games, we don't necessarily think towards full console experiences, like quite literally a current-gen game then ported over to our mobile phones. But no, this is exactly what Apple was displaying to us. They want to start getting really serious with gaming. Now, as an MLG Pro Dorito Lord 360 quickscoper, I thought to myself, this is really interesting. Even though I would obviously prefer to sit down in a chair with a controller, with a TV or monitor, and play my console experience, the simple thought and prospect of being able to play console experiences on the go anywhere you want, especially on the device that you use day in day out, being your mobile phone, is pretty damn intriguing. This is obviously why something like the Nintendo Switch has been so successful. It basically allows you to do exactly that, even though the Switch currently right now is definitely showing its age. Now, a little while ago, I ended up upgrading my iPhone from that of an 11 to that of the 15 Pro. I definitely wanted to dip my toes into Apple's new gaming world, especially if they are partnering up with the likes of someone like Capcom in order to bring some of their games over, so that I could eventually test out and see what this is all about. Recently, I have been playing Resident Evil 4 Remake, and I finished it. I went through the entire game. It was definitely an experience, and it was super strange that I was playing this 2023 console title on my mobile phone. Because keeping in mind too, there were such things like mobile ports of console games. This isn't actually the first time that the iPhone has received a mobile port of Resident Evil 4. Way back when, we had the mobile edition for Resi 4 for iPhone, Zebo, and eventually Android. However, that version is a little bit different compared to that of the traditional version on GameCube and PlayStation 2. That version is skinned and gutted and looks terrible. During the time, it was obviously impressive, but it's still not that exact one-to-one version like we're seeing here on iPhone 15 with the Resi 4 Remake. Can we also just talk about how accessible Resident Evil 4 as a whole is? Like, it's on GameCube, PS2, PC, Wii, you got mobile edition, iPhone, Zebo, Android, you got the 360 version, the PS3 version, the Xbox One version, the PS4 version, you got the Oculus VR version,
the Nintendo Switch version.
Then, you got Remake for PS4, Xbox One, PS5, PC, and now iPhone. Resident Evil 4 is quickly turning into that whole Doom thing, trying to basically get it on every single device possible. So what exactly is this experience like? Well, in regards to performance, the game runs at just over 720p. So that's 1560 by 720. Just a little bit over. Apparently this game is using something known as the Metal FX sharpening tool, though even with that tool used here, you can definitely tell with the graphics, because they are basically preset to something of that of low on PC, anti-aliasing and pixelation and artifacting around character models and different effects throughout the game are very apparent and very noticeable. However, because you are playing on such a small screen, if you are playing on iPhone 15, then that resolution, because 720p in 2023-24 sounds pretty damn low, right? A little bit down horrendous. It actually looks incredibly good. Sure, if you do start to get some close-ups of some of the textures, they start to look like that of PlayStation 2 textures. I have seen a comment that's sort of floating around with people saying that when you do play this game on iPhone, it sort of feels like you're playing a PlayStation 2 version of Resi 4 Remake. I just don't think that's true. Like, again, as I was saying, if you do get some close-ups of some of the textures, like on the walls or on the doors, yeah, they're gonna look bad, but like, this is a one-to-one experience of Remake running in the palms of your hands, running on your mobile phone, the same device you used to text your mother. Now, in regards to the actual frame rate, the game runs at 30 frames per second for the most part. So, yeah, this game does have tendencies to dip, and I went into this experience not expecting a consistent frame rate in any sense of which. I would say 30%, maybe 35, even 40% of my entire experience, I was experiencing frame dips. They're not super consistent in that sense, and while it did hinder my experience a little bit, it didn't flat out ruin it to the point where I was getting frustrated. This is mainly going to happen when you're in a combat scenario where, like, let's say a lot of grenade effects are going off, a lot of flame Molotov effects are going off, you have a lot of enemies on screen, you're shooting a bunch of stuff like using the RPG, or you're walking into a new area and flicking the camera around a little bit too quick, things are trying to load in, the frame rate will dip to that of around about like 15 frames. It is kind of egregious in that sense, but for the most part, you are experiencing about 30 frames per second. Do expect, though, frame dips. This is the biggest thing here, and I don't know if Capcom will go ahead and further optimize the game for iPhone. One thing that I did find interesting is for the iPhone version of Resident Evil 8 Village, there are actually graphics options, as if it's essentially just like the PC version ported over to iPhone. You have some insane options to increase the frame rate up to that of like 120 frames, low to like ultra graphics settings, anti-aliasing options, the whole shebang, which is really interesting. Whereas here in Resident Evil 4 Remake for iPhone, no graphics options exist. It seems like it's actually more of a proper iPhone version compared to that of 8. Now, obviously, as the iPhones roll out in the future for 16, 17, 18, and onwards, yeah, looking at something like graphics options in 8, those will be viable. So I guess in a way it's kind of cool that 8 has those to sort of future-proof the game in that sense, but 4 doesn't. And just talking about the future of iPhone, no doubt that the actual performance of 4 Remake will obviously improve as hardware improves for the iPhone. So while I would say that this is definitely not the most optimal way to experience this game as of right now on the 15 Pro, it's more so of a novelty factor in the ways that, wow, we are actually getting console games here on our mobile phones. I need to stress though that, like, I had fun. I really enjoyed it. You know, just kicking back on the couch as I would with my Nintendo Switch, but I was playing on my phone, playing Resident Evil 4 Remake, and considering that Switch currently doesn't have a version of this game. Keeping in mind too, though, that this is also available for iPad, so if you are using the iPad Pro, the current one that is powered by the M2 chip, you are going to see improved performance across any of the console-related games on the App Store. So obviously the best way to experience these via Apple's devices is going to be via iPad. But it kind of made me think that in that sense, you may as well just end up playing the console game. I think most people that are going to be dipping into these console experiences via the App Store will be iPhone users. The other thing though is that the iPhone heats up incredibly hot, like really fucking hot. I was almost tempted to try cooking an egg on the back of my phone because the 15, when it first came out, was already struggling from heating issues. This is due in part to the new hardware that's inside, as well as the new titanium body. Apple have since released a software update to sort of further control the heating problems, but they're still prevalent, and especially when you're playing something like, you know, Resi 8 or Resi 4 Remake, my god, it gets so hot. I think that if Apple are going to be looking at console experiences on their phones and ports of such, then they definitely need to look at some sort of cooling option for the 16 and 17 going forward. And you will start to see frame dips the hotter the phone gets. It takes about like 15-20 minutes for the phone to reach maximum heat, as if it's just been zipped through the microwave. So the funny thing was, I actually found that I got better performance while I was sitting in front of a fan, while I was sitting in a cooler environment. It is also currently summer in my country too, so it's just hot in the environment as is on top of the phone, just pushing it to the limits. But yeah, you'll get better performance if you're actually in a cool environment, which is hilarious. Now, looking at the actual control scheme, you do have the on-screen touch controls with the PlayStation button layouts. That's cool, but it's also not cool because it feels awful. No one's going to be playing a console game on their phone via touch controls. So you do kind of have like two options here. You can Bluetooth sync up either your PS5 DualSense or Xbox controller, take your pick. But personally, I think that the most optimal and best way to do your mobile phone gaming here is backbone. This thing is absolutely amazing. Most of my Resi 4 experience was via the backbone. This thing's incredible for any other mobile gaming, not just like console related stuff, but any stuff where button inputs or an analog stick input would be just that much better, where you're using touch controls. Absolutely plug this bad boy in. Doesn't require charging, nothing of the such. You just clip your phone into it and away you go. Now, aside from the issues that I have mentioned right here though, the biggest of which is most certainly the price point. Apple are charging full price, the exact same price you would pay for the console version for the iPhone version, which is insanity. The game, for me at least anyway, is $90. As of right now, I do believe that there is a 50% off sale for the launch of the game, so I actually got it for about $40. But it is surprising to see that Apple didn't actually tie the current console games on the App Store, so for the likes of 4 Remake and Resident Evil 8, and eventually Assassin's Creed Mirage sometime next year, to that of Apple Arcade. I think this is probably going to be the only way to actually gauge interest in console gaming on your phone, is to tie it into that sub-service. There are a few okay games as part of Apple's Apple Arcade game service, but to actually have console games into that, I think you'd generate a lot more interest, and this is something that Apple absolutely need to do going forward. I don't think many people are prepared to pay full price for an iPhone version of a console game, when they can just pay the same price to get the most definitive, optimized experience. You either have to make the native iPhone versions significantly cheaper, like 1/3 of the price of the console version, or chuck it into Apple Arcade. You're probably also curious about battery consumption. Yeah, this thing will chew the life force out of your phone. Straight up Harry Potter, Dementor, suck the life out of it. About an hour's worth of gameplay equals that of about 40% battery. So you're gonna get about like 2.5 hours before you absolutely need to charge your phone. Going back to it though, if this is something that Apple are serious about and that they further expand on the hardware inside the iPhone for future models, this is something that we will see improved. With all of that being said though, you have to admit that it is so impressive that right now we are currently seeing AAA games running on a mobile phone. When we look to, 13 years ago, 14 years ago, we were nowhere near even close. 16 years ago, we were playing Snake. As a kid growing up, I always envisioned something like this happening. Being able to play my PlayStation 2 games on a phone. And now that is quite literally happening with current gen titles. This is just the beginning, and it's only going to get better from here on out. It will definitely be interesting to see what other developers and publishers end up partnering up with Apple to bring some of their games onto the App Store. I hope that further optimization on Apple's part as well as the developers' part definitely ensues if they plan on bringing more titles to the system. And point number one is most certainly Apple figuring out a better payment model for these games. As I said, Apple Arcade is 100% the way to go. One last thing that I will leave you guys with is, how hilarious would it be if Square Enix ended up releasing the Kingdom Hearts games natively on iPhone before they did with Switch? We know that obviously we ended up getting the cloud versions of Kingdom Hearts on Switch, not native ports, and given that Square Enix definitely do have big interest when it comes to mobile phone gaming, this is honestly something that is entirely possible to happen. Alright guys, that's all for today. Be sure to follow me on my other social media platforms, links in the description down below. Also be sure to subscribe to the channel to keep up with all the latest and greatest. I'm Cynical, hopefully you're having a fantastic day, and we'll talk real soon. Peace.